Welcome back. Chapter 17, Catherine. Sunlight muscles through the cracks in my blinds. I can hear my mother moving around in the kitchen. Every sound has a precise meaning. The gentle bump is the cabinet door above the stove closing. The faint rushing is water flowing from the sink tap. And the gurgling signals the Mr. Coffee machine is doing its job. I can't keep avoiding her. The terrible suspicion I felt yesterday has abated, but I'm not ready to share it with anyone yet. I can barely acknowledge it myself. I've heard of Munchausen syndrome by proxy. I think I said that. In which a parent, typically the mother, sickens their child with poisons or unnecessary medication. That manifestation of severe mental illness, which is a form of child abuse, gets a fair amount of media attention. But this reverse Munchausen, or whatever it is something I've never heard before. What kind of mother will go to incredible lengths to fake her own disease for the sole purpose of keeping her daughter tied to her? I rise and throw on cutoffs and a top, then head to the bathroom to wash my face and brush my teeth. I make no effort to keep my movements quiet. There's no reason to avoid warning my mother I'm about to appear. When I walk into the living room, I see she has poured me a cup of coffee and left it on the table in front of the couch. I reach for it and take a sip, then I sit down next to her. Thanks. Did you have fun last night? It was okay. What movie did you see? We've done this countless times before, me and Mom sitting side by side on our soft old couch talking. It never felt unnatural before. I decided to tell the truth. I didn't see a movie. I went to see Ethan. My mother's eyebrows lifted above the rim of her mug. How is Ethan doing? If my mother played a part in the destruction of the only significant romantic relationship I've ever had, if she actually spiked my boyfriend's drink with something like Benadryl to make it appear that he was self-destructing, it isn't apparent from her expression. I see no guilt or remorse, only mild curiosity. The same. She nods, still tending bar and talking about he's going to be a big photographer. My mother's doing it again. She's inserting splinters that make me look at Ethan in the worst possible light. My words, the same, could stretch to cover a range of possibilities. He's still charming and handsome and fun. He still makes me laugh. He's still in love with me. He still makes me want to be with him. My mother picked the most depargent interpretation, the one designed to keep distance between me and my ex. Anger flashes through me. I bite back the words, "Don't try to manipulate me." I take a sip of coffee to buy myself a moment to study my emotions and voice. Then I look directly into my mother's eyes. Since neither of us has to work today, I've got a plan. My mother is staring out the window of the Bonneville, looking for the landmarks we once relied on to find our way. There, turn right at the Shell station. We're about an hour from home, but this area was home once, too. We lived in Lancaster for 2 years until I was midway through 10th grade before moving to Harrisburg. So far today, my mother's memory has been impeccable. She easily recalled the address of our old apartment. I did too, but I let her be the one to recite it. And she noticed that the dry cleaners on the main road leading to our complex has been replaced by a 7-Eleven. I don't feel like playing along with the banter my mother keeps attempting to ignite. We've taken a lot of road trips before, but this one is different. We're traveling down memory lane, literally and figuratively. I take a right off the bus road, and a moment later, we pull up in front of our old apartment complex. It looks indistinguishable from thousands of other red brick buildings in hundreds of cities. The building appears to be solid, but no expense was incurred to give it any design flair. It's a box with windows. My mother tilts her head up as she gazes at it. 5th floor, 7th window from the left. That was our apartment, a 1-bedroom where my mother and I slept in twin beds with a shared nightstand between us. The window didn't open more than a few inches, which my mother told me was a fire hazard, but she couldn't get management to do anything about it. So she brought a fire extinguisher at Home Depot and kept it under my bed and told me that under no circumstances were we ever allowed to light candles. We were happy here. 8th grade was painful for me, especially as a new kid joining the school in February, but my life turned around once I made it to high school. My features seemed like they fit my face better somehow. I suppose I felt a bit more confident in my skin as well. By the end of 9th grade, I made a couple of friends, Aaliyah and Chelsea, who was studious and shy like me. Once I had someone to sit with at lunch table, I stopped dreading weekdays. As for my mom, well, she seemed content too. She was working at a steakhouse, and because I was old enough to stay home alone at night, she took on dinner shifts, which were more lucrative. She brought her first car, the Bonneville, because it wasn't safe for her to take the bus home so late at night. We didn't see each other as much because she was usually heading to work by the time I got home from school, but I was fine with that. It was nice to have a little breathing room for the first time in my life. That wasn't my only big change. At the beginning of 10th grade, I met a boy. Charlie was a sensitive, sweet guy who wrote for the school newspaper and told me that one day he planned to write novels. I believed he'd actually do it too. He had a smile that started slowly and spread until it took over his entire face. And even though his vision was terrible and he wore thick glasses, he seemed to see everything. I've learned that our minds skim past slightly garbled written words because we automatically use context to activate the areas in our brain that jump to conclusions about what comes next. That's one reason why it's so hard to catch my own typos. We see what we expect to see. Charlie's mind didn't work that way. He truly bore witness to the world, cataloging the details everyone else missed. Shortly after we started hanging out together, he told me that our English teacher's handwriting was changing, with the letters becoming tighter and narrower. I didn't believe him, so he made me pull 2 papers out of my binders, one from the beginning of the year and one more recent. The evidence was there, in blue ballpoint pen. At first, I thought it was either Parkinson or a shift in mood, Charlie had told me. I looked it up, and handwriting shifts can be symptoms of either. At first, he nodded. Now I know it's a change in mood. I was fascinated. How can you tell? He stopped, He stopped wearing his wedding rings a week ago. Everyone assumed Charlie and I were a couple before we even kissed for the first time. We hadn't been dating all that long before my mother broke the news. We had to move again. She gave me a single day to return to school and say my goodbyes. When I got home that afternoon, she sold or given away our beds and couch and the rest of our furniture to neighbors, and our remaining belongings were packed in the back of the Bonneville. It was almost like we never lived in Lancaster at all. I glanced at my mother now. She's still staring up at the apartment from the passenger seat. I wonder what memories she is lost in. If my mother has researched Alzheimer's disease, she would know more recent memories are typically the first to disappear. It would make sense that her recollections from this time in her life would be relatively unmarred. Tell me again why we had to leave. It's a struggle to keep my voice from cracking. Charlie, Aaliyah, Chelsea, we kept in touch for a little while after I left with promises to call every week and visit. But by 11th grade, we drifted apart. They moved on while I floated backwards. I was alone at a lunch table again. One of the waitresses at work accused me of stealing. The owner believed her. Either that or he just wanted to keep sleeping with her on the side. He told me I could leave on the spot without collecting my last paycheck or he'd call the police. I already know this story. Why didn't you fight back? If you let him call the police, maybe she would have gotten fired. My mom shakes her head. The world doesn't work that way. But why did we have to move so far away? Why did we have to move at all? My mother sighs and leans her head back. Then she tells me something I don't know. I was already a month behind on rent. And remember the Bonneville needed new tires? I was getting hit with a lot of bills. I couldn't keep my head above water. And when I got fired, I knew there was no way I'd ever catch up. I feel a flash of guilt. I gave her such a hard time back then. While I was discovering the sweet thrill of holding the hands of a boy I liked, my mother was grappling with incredible financial stress. She'd already been slim, but she must have lost another 10 pounds during that time, and she has never put them back on. So we skipped out? She nods. We had to move far away that I wouldn't bump into our old landlord on the street. I still owe him $600. I turn away from her and look out the window again. I can almost see Charlie walking home that last day and leaning in for a kiss goodbye, then pulling away and using a fingertip to slide his glasses back up his nose. I watched him walk until he turned a corner and vanished. My heart is breaking all over again. I thought this place could be a portal into understanding my mother better, but this setting yields nothing but sadness. Should we keep driving? She asked. I nod when my mom suggests going by my high school or checking to see if one of my old friends is still living in the same house. I tell her I'd rather not. We end up picking up subs from a deli we used to like, but it's under new ownership now and the food doesn't taste the same. We eat in our car, and when we're done, Mom gets out to throw away our trash. I watch her pause as she walks down the sidewalk to give a homeless man the half of her sandwich she didn't eat. Guilt slices over me. Maybe I've been focusing on the wrong memories. My mother is the only person in my life who has always been there for me. When I wanted to win our elementary school spelling bee, she endlessly quizzed me without ever once revealing how boring it must have been for her. She stayed up half the night running up and down the stairs to the laundry machines in our apartment basement to wash my comforter and sheets when I had the flu and threw up on them. She always made sure I had enough before she ate, so I never went hungry, even though I suspected she did many times. Given that context, my fear about my mother seems crazy. She never tried to hold me back from going to college. On the contrary, she's the one who sat down with a calculator and crunched numbers until we figured out a way to manage the tuition by me attending classes part-time and living at home. She seemed genuinely excited when I told her about my job offer from Johns Hopkins pending my graduation. How can I suspect my mother of such a horrible deception? And yet, I can't shake it loose from my mind. She returns to the car and opens the passenger side door, then slides back into her seat. Any place else you'd like to go? She asked. I think for a moment. Let's drive by your old restaurant. She instantly shakes her head. The idea gains momentum in my mind. Come on, Mom. We can go in and see if that jerk still owns it. He screwed up both our lives. Don't you want to get a little revenge? The more I think about it, the angrier I become. If my mother hadn't been fired, we might have found a way to stay in the apartment. I wouldn't have lost my friends and Charlie. My mother is staring at me. What kind of revenge do you have in mind? I don't know. We can start by calling in a complaint to the health department about seeing rodents in the kitchen. I can't tell from my mother's expression if she likes my idea, so I throw out a few more. If we want to really get nasty, we can find out if he's still married and tell his wife about the waitress. Oh, and we can post terrible reviews online. My mother interrupts me. He's probably long gone, Catherine. Even if he isn't, that's all in the past. I'm not going to mount a campaign to punish him for something that happened nearly 10 years ago. But let's drive by and we can. Just like that, I feel my mother's temper surge. It's a force field that blocks my words and causes me to shrink away from her. Knock it off! Who you yelling at? No. My mother exhales. Then she says more softly, I never want to see that place again. I feel deflated as we drive home. We listen to the radio and make an occasional comment about traffic or the weather, like strangers in a ride share. When we stop at a gas station, my mother buys a couple of Tootsie Pops from the mini mart inside and hands me a raspberry one, my favorite flavor. But things still don't feel right between us. My mom takes over the wheel after we get gas, and I rest my head against the window. Fatigue settles over me as the low buzz of the wheels against pavement lulls me into a dreamlike trance. Then a memory flash jerks me back to full conscious. The night before we moved to Lancaster, after I cried myself to sleep, I woke abruptly. It took a moment for my eyes to adjust, but when they did, I saw my mother pacing the length of our tiny apartment from the living room area into our bedrooms and back again. She already told me the bad news that we had to leave because of the allegations against her at work, but there must have been something else weighing on her, something terrible enough to keep her relentlessly pacing through the night. There was one thing she did too. Every time she neared our window, she paused and peered out. I study her profile now as she briefly maneuvers into the left lane to pass a slower moving car. My mother is an attractive woman, but she never calls attention to her looks. Hers is a quieter beauty. I used to urge her to grow her hair out from its short bob. It's so lush and shiny, but she never would, and now I'm glad. The simple style suits her. She wears no makeup beyond an occasional swipe of mascara and her beloved cherry chapstick, which means I can see every laugh and frown lines and freckle on her face. Her appearance is transparent, but my mother keeps secrets. She sure do, child. For the first time in my life, I'm keeping some from her too. I'm beginning to think the trip to our old neighborhood wasn't a waste of time. My mother refused to drive by the steakhouse, but I remember its name, RJ's. I can still visualize the logo. Those burgundy initials encircled in gold were emblazoned on the plastic bags she occasionally brought home with extra food from the kitchen. If my goal is to trace my mother's story backwards to her roots, maybe RJ's is the first step on the path towards the truth. Someone she worked with there could recall something my mother once said or did, a clue that could carry me to the next stepping stone back in time. My mother is extremely careful in what she reveals about herself, but everyone makes mistakes. And perhaps she's less cautious with casual acquaintance, people who are far less interested in her history than me. My mother turns to me. What are you thinking about? I don't hesitate. Chocolate? She laughed. The candy didn't do it for you? That was just a dessert appetizer. Tell you what, let's pick up a box of mix and make some brownies when we get home. Deal. While the brownies bake, I close the door to my room and get out my legal pad and write down every single detail of RJ's I can remember my mother recounting. That's the end of chapter 17. Okay. So Catherine had a little slight plan that didn't go as planned. she was trying to get her mother, see if her mother was faking her Alzheimer's. But she did mention something about Munchausen's, like a couple of chapters ago. I was like, I wonder if her mother got Munchausen's condition. Munchausen, Alzheimer's. I'm still not believing that she got anything because I don't know. I'm not in her shoes. I don't know her story, but we're getting to know her story, right? So I can't say whether I would or wouldn't be like, but this is this and this. But then again, as I stand, I think I would. But this chapter was, I don't know, it wasn't telling or anything like that. It's just still having me have questions. So I'm going to just have to see you in the next chapter, which is chapter 18. Bye.